Looking at this defensive front, we can start there. Jordan Birch comes in from South Carolina. He's a guy off the edge that they expect some good things from, and they've got three or four guys that played significant time coming back to that defensive front.
Yeah, and Birch is kind of the key here because Brandon Dorlus returning from a season ago is huge. That was Oregon's best defensive lineman last year. Wasn't particularly close. I know DJ Johnson led the team in sacks, but Brandon Dorlus was the guy who had the biggest impact consistently on the defensive line, on a unit, by the way, that struggled to create pressure on the quarterback. But a big reason for that is they didn't have enough quality pass rushers. And Casey Rogers is a disruptive interior defensive lineman, but he's better against the run. He's not much of a pass rusher. And you don't typically get great interior pass rushers. They're really, really hard to find. Turns out Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh are not just waiting around every corner. They're tough players to have on your team. So that's the first part of it. But last year, Oregon's edge players just didn't create enough consistent pressure. And DJ Johnson was drafted by the Panthers higher than I thought he would, and he had a decent season last year. But I think what Oregon was missing was depth, and I think that's what Jordan Birch brings, because when you have DJ Johnson, who I think was really, really good in spurts, but was a little inconsistent with getting pressure on the quarterback, and then you have Brandon Dorlus, and then you don't really have a high-end pass rusher after that, it allows the offense, I think, to really focus on those one or two guys and leave everybody else to one-on-ones. And Oregon just didn't have the guys who were capable of doing that. And I mean, Mace Funa is was a talented recruit, is a good solid outside linebacker, but he's not an elite pass rusher. And he played much better in the Holiday Bowl against North Carolina. He was the MVP of that game, as a matter of fact, had a couple of sacks. Oregon needs him to be that sort of player. And then Jordan Birch has to produce from the edge, and he has to free up Brandon Dorlus to get one-on-one pass rush opportunities. And Mateo Uiagalelei, five-star incoming true freshman, he's got to be able to be a quality player as well, and I think he can be. And I'm really, really high on what he can bring to the Ducks. That's, of course, DJ's younger brother, the quarterback now at Oregon State, formerly at Clemson. So when you look at the top-line defensive front a year ago, and you compare it to this year, and then you factor in a guy in Popo Amavai coming back for what'll be his 7th year, actually, of college football. He missed all last season with an injury, but he was an all-conference caliber player last time he was on the field in 2021. You put him up there with Brandon Dorlus and Casey Rogers, and I think you got something working on the interior that's deeper than what you had a season ago. And you put Jordan Birch and Mateo Uiagalelei and Mace Funa in there at the edge spots, and I think that's deeper than what you had a season ago. And that's where it has to start with this Oregon team. They were excellent against the run, except for the Oregon State game, uncharacteristically last year. They were really, really good. They held the Utah offense, the one that ran all over USC twice. They held them to 10 points. The Utah defense scored 7 points in that game. But they're a run-first team, and Oregon shut them down because they were really good against the run, but they struggled getting pressure on quarterbacks, and that's where they have to be better this season. And they've made the personnel moves that on paper look like they're going to be better on that front. They had a historically bad pass rush season a year ago for Oregon stats all time, but it has to materialize on the field because Pac-12 quarterback play, man, it's no joke.
Got to check out Spencer's work on a regular basis, folks. Locked on Ducks, Locked on Pac-12. You see it right there on the screen. Join Spencer on Twitter as well. Talking Oregon defense. And looking at the linebacker core, it's got a transfer portal theme to it as well. Justin Jacobs coming in from Iowa. Connor Soleil, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sully.
From Arizona State.
Connor Sully.
We'll get that straight. And Spencer's here to straighten us out. Linebacker play, how are we looking there?
Well, that's probably the unit that has the most room to grow. I'd say even more than the defensive line. I mean, a season ago, you had two regular players in there in Jeffrey Bassa, who struggled according to PFF, and I think with the eye test as well, and Justin Flo, who was basically, former second highest rated recruit in Oregon history. His career really got decimated by injuries, and he just never looked like his fully healthy self after he got hurt in 2021 and missed most of that season. The one game he did play healthy, he had 14 tackles and 2 forced fumbles. But after that, he never really looked like he was the guy that he was coming out of high school physically. So those two guys struggled. You had a player in there in Jackson LeDuc who, is just not a high level Power Five football player. You had another outside linebacker or strong side backer, whatever you want to call it, and Trevin Maai, who again, decent, kind of low end Power Five starter, high end G5 kind of guy. If they can have upgrades production wise from those particular spots, I think you're going to look at a much better Oregon defense than what you saw a year ago, where they just struggled against the pass mightily. And I think the two biggest reasons were, the pass rush, number one, but the inability of linebackers to cover. Like they just didn't have guys who could cover at a high level, and they got beat a lot. And I think they were still adapting to a new defensive system, and they were guys who were just not always as capable as you'd like them to be in man-to-man coverage situations, because you wouldn't think that a team would be, so bad against the pass as Oregon was a year ago defensively when you have a first-round NFL cornerback on your team. Typically, that's going to do a lot, and Gonzo did do a lot. And I now look back at it and think, wow, if we didn't have Gonzo, what would this pass defense have been? Because he takes away their best receiver, he takes away a half of the field, and still the pass defense was just not good enough. So Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi have to be able to call a better defense and adjust better than they did a season ago, particularly in the Oregon State and Washington games, when Washington wasn't going to run the ball and Oregon State wasn't going to throw it, and we weren't able to stop them. And that's, for a great defensive mind like Dan Lanning and an experienced and winning one like Tosh Lupoi, they I'm sure expect better of themselves. And Oregon fans should expect better of them as well, because those were really, really poor performances from the Oregon defense. But it's not, the sky is falling. It was year one. They had a lot of new players come in for a reason. I think they have a roster of guys that they feel are going to better fit their scheme and what they want to accomplish. They have to show it on the field. But you look at the linebackers and say Justin Jacobs comes in from Iowa. That's a guy who's got a lot of potential, has had an injury history though. So you need to have depth. You need Jeffrey Bossa to step up. You need Devin Jackson, maybe a young freshman linebacker to redshirt freshman to, see more meaningful action this year. He might be a sophomore. I don't remember if he burned his red shirt last year, but pretty highly rated recruit. You have Connor Soley coming from Arizona State, expected to just be a solid veteran guy. But I tell you, the wild card I'd watch for in this unit, Mark, is Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill is moving from safety down to linebacker for his final year. He might have another year of eligibility. I have to double check that. But he is moving from safety to linebacker, and I am highly intrigued by what he could be there. But you look at the way Bossa struggled a year ago, Justin Flo struggled, Jackson LeDuc didn't do a whole lot for the team, and Noah Sewell was good but not the best version of himself. A lot of room for the linebackers to grow this year, but it's going to be an almost entirely new unit except for Jeff Bossa.
Jamal Hill, 13 starts and 62 tackles over the course of his career. When we look at the secondary, obviously, when the pass defense struggles statistically, and people can see, this is one of the lower ranked pass defenses in the country, they point right to the secondary. Obviously, the pass rush and the secondary play go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Got to have the pass rush that was void for most of the season, as you outlined. Christian Gonzalez, yes, remarkable incoming transfer from Colorado. So he moves on. And anybody who loves college football, if you love just watching football, even if you don't root for the Ducks, if you can't appreciate Bennett Williams and the type player that he was, I just thought he was an exceptional player. And
I assure you, there are a lot of Oregon fans that don't. So here's the thing with Bennett Williams, and they have his brother. They have his brother Evan in there. So he transferred in from Fresno State. Evan did this year. He'll be a 1 year. Probably plug and play starter. That's kind of I think he was preseason all conference second team for a guy who hasn't taken a snap of football playing as a member of the Pac-12. So I think that's telling as to where the expectations are for Pac-12 coaches who saw him at Fresno State and know that guy's a baller. Bennett Williams takes a lot of flack in Oregon circles. There is validity to it, and there is less validity to it, because Bennett Williams a year ago, if you had him playing basically as exclusively as a box safety and never made him play in space or over the top, he was really, really good. He was an excellent, and the PFF grades reflect this, he was an excellent run stuffer. He's probably Oregon's most sure tackler a year ago. He could blitz a little bit as a defensive back. He could cover well enough, kind of around the line of scrimmage, but he made really good tackles and plays in space. However, he lacked the high-end speed to keep up with some of the great wide receivers that Oregon faced a year ago, and he got burned in that regularly in a big, big way. Most notably, twice in the Washington game, his inability to have that elite closing speed was responsible for 2 touchdowns that were both over 50 yards. So that has got Oregon fans, I think, misrepresenting in some way what he was over the course of his career, which was a playmaker and a really good player inside the box. But the thing that I would look at, and I understand people's frustrations with him and such, because those moments were not good. He gave up a long touchdown as well in the Holiday Bowl against North Carolina. Same thing. He just got beat by a receiver who was faster than him. But the question that I would ask is, why was he consistently put in those situations? And the answer has to be, he was the best available for the Ducks, and that they have made upgrades in that sense from a speed standpoint. Dan Lanning talked about that at one point during the offseason when asked about, priorities for this year. It was upgrading speed, and you're seeing a lot more speed come into this team. Guys like Roderick Pleasant in the 2023 class, who is probably the fastest Duck currently on the roster. Devin Jackson, who I mentioned, speed guy. Tysheem Johnson got speed. Evan Williams, free safety. I believe he is faster than his brother. Don't quote me on that, though, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So I hope that that's what we see from the Ducks this year, is an ability to prevent those long touchdowns, because they gave them up against Washington a couple times, and they gave them up against North Carolina. They gave one up against Colorado. Like, they gave up too many long touchdowns through the air, and I think that was because of a lack of speed. And I think that that's something that the staff has worked diligently to address this offseason, because it does the frequency with which Williams got beat over the top compared to other people was higher than what I think we saw from the Ducks. And so that leads me to believe they didn't feel they had a better option, or they would not have, because I do think Dan Lanning is a good coach and thinks about this stuff, because that's what he does as a coach. I don't think he would have kept putting Bennett Williams in that situation unless he felt he had a better option. So hopefully Oregon just has better options in the speed department this year to match up with some of the great receivers they'll face in the Pac-12.
Yeah, my comments to lead into that conversation on Bennett Williams basically comes from expectations and reputation, and then me saying, as I do, trying to track everybody across the country, okay, this guy's got a name. Now I'm going to watch him and keep an eye on him for the 4 or 5 or 6 games that I watch for a particular team like in Oregon. And he was laying the wood on people and making plays.
Yep.
And that's the guy that I saw.
Yeah, no, he's a hard hitter in the box, and he's an excellent tackler. I mean, probably Oregon's most sure tackler over the last couple of years. Like, anytime he would need to make a tackle in space, felt like he made it just about every time. And whether that was, a tight end in the flat, running back on a screen pass, running back in space, whatever it was, he was able to make that play. He's just not a guy who you want the defense to test stretching the field. Defenses did, to their credit, and Oregon got burned for it, and hopefully we don't see that this year from the Ducks.
Spencer McLaughlin is breaking down the Ducks for us here. 2023 is right upon us. Camden Lewis, dependable, 14 of 16. I don't know if he can hit the long one, or trying to think
not
of
the
any
super long. His range is kind of about 45.
Okay.
But anything inside of that, I feel pretty good. But just a real quick thing on him, Mark. So he arrived to Oregon as a 5-star kicker in 2019, and to be completely honest here, he was terrible. I mean, he missed extra points. He missed in the Auburn game I think it was a 20-yard field goal, 18-yard. I mean, Oregon was basically on the goal line, snapping the ball, and he missed the field goal. Like, he was awful. He then loses his kicking job to I think Cattleman was the kid's name in 2020, and Cattleman looked like he was going to be off to the NFL. And Camden Lewis, in this college football world of the transfer portal, did not do what so many kids would have done and left to go find a job. Instead, he stayed with the Ducks. He gutted it out. He stayed there amidst a coaching change, by the way, and he earned his job back to where he's a preseason all-conference kicker. I think second team, and he was second team all-conference a year ago, and deservedly so, because he has become reliable. But his growth over the course of his career, I never miss an opportunity when it presents itself to bring this up, because it is such a great and undersold college football story for the Ducks that he was. I mean, I literally had no faith in him in 2019. None. Go watch the 2019 Pac-12 championship game. He made kicks in that game. It was ugly, man. He was knuckleballing them, sidewinding. It looked terrible. And now a year ago, anytime he lines up for a field goal, I feel like there's a good chance he's going to make it. And that is for him to lose his job, stick it out, win it back, and earn the respect of Duck fans and the conference and media members and coaches is a great, great story of perseverance.
Love it. Well told as well. Overall, special teams can change from year to year. Sometimes those punt and kickoff returners aren't determined until late in camp. Just overall, your thoughts about special teams and how that typically, well, with the new coaching staff, there's not a special teams culture there that we know of. It's only a year old, but just your thoughts about how that may look this year.
It's got to be better. It has to be better. I trust Camden Lewis. I think Adam Berry, who came over from Washington State last year, is a guy, Andrew Boyle. Andrew Boyle is a good kickoff specialist. His touchback rate was really good last year. But those are the only areas the Ducks were, passable or above expectations a year ago in the special teams department. And I think that hurt the defense because our kickoff coverage was terrible. Our punt coverage was terrible. Our punt returns and kick returns were really not as good as they should have been. And they are looking for new guys in the return game this year. And they cycled through a lot of them last year trying to find, I haven't seen a better returner at Oregon since probably Charles Nelson and DeAnthony Thomas before that. Those two guys, you knew that they were your return guys. Oregon doesn't have that. They haven't had it the last couple of years. I thought it would be Seven McGee. He was back there, and it just never really clicked for him. And then he ended up transferring in the middle of the season because he wasn't playing a whole heck of a lot. So that, I think, caused a little bit of a wrinkle in the return game and such. But the punt coverage, the actual punts, they bring in Luke Dunn from Australia, and he needs to just completely revitalize the punting game because you can't have a great defense that is having to start at the opponent's 35, 40-yard line routinely. Like, you have to give them some advantages, and Oregon's punt team just didn't do that a year ago. And then there was the disaster in the Oregon State game, and, the Oregon State game is a great example of it. For as bad as the defense was, and inexplicably bad, the special teams was arguably worse. Because the special teams gave the defense that allowed all those touchdowns without Oregon State completing a pass. The special teams gave them the ball at the 1-yard line, first and goal, because Adam Berry dropped the ball on the 1-yard line. And then the kickoff return, or the kickoff coverage team rather, not only allowed a return past midfield, but then added a face mask to boot. And so then Oregon State is first and 10 at Oregon's 30-yard line. And the defense is just not going to be given a chance. Like, you're just asking so much of them. They should have been able to come up with at least one stop to hold them to a field goal. But still, they were put behind the 8 ball there. So I say all this to point out that the special teams, aside from the touchback percentage, which I think is really, really good, and the field goal make percentage and the extra points, that was all good last year. Everything else for special teams was a mess. And it hurt Oregon several times, and I think more than people realize. They called the third side of the ball, and you can't ignore it. And Oregon's got to be better on that front. And I have high hopes that Luke Dunn can improve the punting game because, it also just I feel like it's almost deflating for a defense. When you know you're going to come on the field, and then you watch a return guy bring it out beyond midfield, and you're like, we're starting on our own half of the field, like that's not the same energy. You know what fires up a defense though? When the punter knocks it out at the 5-yard line.
Yeah.
And now the defense is licking their chops because, hey, the end zone is right there. I can smell it when I get onto the field. That gives them a different edge, and that was just completely missing a season ago.
Good stuff from Spencer. Appreciate you, Spencer, stopping by.
Anytime.
Always to break down some Oregon football. You know you're always welcome, and we want everyone to head on over to Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12. There's a Pac-12 season, folks, and it's going to be a special one for historical reasons, but it's also going to be a good one. Before all this mess ensued, we're coming off a
There's
really
gonna be great
strong
football.
season. It's going to be great football with the best quarterback play in all of college football.
Absolutely.